is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the editor-in-chief of Unwinnable.com. I've never seen him play poker, but he's got a full house of monster cards, Stu Horvath.
That's a good one.
I've been working on it.
I thought you were going to be shaky after the last one, but...
Yeah, you know, the card references are a little easier.
Yeah, fair enough.
So how you doing today, Stu?
Pretty good.
And what are we talking about in this mini-episode?
We're talking about Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Monster Cards from 1981, which most people don't know about.
I only know about them because when I purchased my hoard from an old friend, there was a stack of them included.
Did you have any idea they existed?
No.
Yeah.
It was something that I found in the bottom of a Tupperware bin with a bunch of other books and modules. And I was like, oh, it's a binder. And, you know, folks, for those listening at home, these monster cards,
They're about index card size.
you could actually get plastic sheets to put them in a binder or a trapper keeper if you're one of the cool kids and had a trapper keeper. And when I'm going through this box, I found this old binder and I thought to myself, well, it's either going to be some old DM notes or monstrous compendium pages. And then I open up the binder and there are these monster cards with all this amazing artwork, and I never knew they existed.
Yeah, I don't know how I found them. I found them by accident. It was recent. It was like last 10 years easy. And I was just like, I've never seen this. And they're so early and they're gorgeous. I don't understand why more people don't know them. Apparently, they weren't released in large numbers, which would probably explain it. But still.
It's pretty cool. I recently did a search on eBay ahead of us doing this episode, and a complete set goes for about $350.
What?
Which is crazy.
That's crazy.
However, other sets that are complete go from anywhere from $100 on up to that $350 mark because they are kind of rare.
Hey, get paid. If you got them and you want to get rid of them, get paid.
Yeah, don't sell them to us, though, because we already have them.
Yeah. So they're about index card size. There were 4 sets. They all came out in 1981. They all contain 20 monster cards and a checklist card. And they're full color with stats on the back, abbreviated. And almost all of them are from the monster manual, except 3 or 4 in each set are original monsters, which I didn't realize until I was looking around trying to put together my thoughts for this episode. I realized that some of these monsters appear in Monster Manual 2, but this is 1981, and that's several years off.
So that's pretty cool. That's like when you got the Goonies cards from Topps back in the day, and you finally saw the octopus that they referenced in the movie that you never actually got to see in the movie.
Exactly. Like, there's some stars here, man. You got the Obliviax Memory Moss, the Thrycreen, which is actually a ripoff from Arduin.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. There's a whole bunch of weird ones. The Kored, the Mistu. It's like living mist.
That makes sense.
Not something I ever used, but there's a bunch. All the artwork is full color, which I think is what makes these things really, really special. Most of the art for early D&D, aside of the front and back covers, is black and white. And a lot of that art is from Errol Otis and Dave Trampier. So you don't ever really see a lot of the other artists get their full color art due, And it's basically a who's who of D&D artists all working in color. You've got Bill Willingham, you've got Errol Otis, you've got Dave Trampier, you've got some Sutherland, you've got Rosloff, you've got Jim Holloway. Everybody's in there. It's crazy.
Yeah, and it's something that you could easily slot into your backpack, or if you got the sleeves for a Trapper Keeper, and take to your games with you.
Yeah.
And actually have something a little more visual that if you were a Dungeon Master at the time, I could imagine sitting on the other side of the Dungeon Master screen, also known as the business end of the Dungeon Master screen. Where the work gets done. Talking to the player, describing the monster to them, pull the monster card out and visually show them what the monster looks like without having to hold up the book and cover up a bunch of stats and maybe some other monsters that you might be dealing with there. And it kind of really helps the players envision more the monster that they're fighting, especially if they're fighting it for the first time.
Yeah, and this is all new art. It's not colored art from the monster manuals. And it's often other artists doing the art. The first monster manual is almost all Trampier or Sutherland. So this time you get like a Willingham Displacer Beast. And it looks different. It's cool. It's exciting to see a different artist's interpretation of it. And to just have more art of these monsters. And as far as I know, this is the first time they've attempted to do a reference card set. I don't know how useful this really was as a reference card set on the DM side. I agree with you about using it as art to convey the monster to the players, but the backside has an abbreviated monster manual entry. I don't know how useful that is. I feel like first edition monster stats are so simple. It's basically a line of text in your module or written down, and they aren't complicated. It's still a very simple game at this point. I don't know if you need a reference card.
Well, I think for a DM, it's good to have a quick look at, so hey, here's what the monster looks like, and here's what I know you need to hit, what the hit points are, what the class of the creature is, what the creature's attacks are, especially if you have limited space at a gaming table, because, you know, most people I'd imagine playing back in the day were either at a dining room table, at a kitchen table, maybe a table in the local library or the high school, and so you have a limited amount of space to sprawl out all your stuff.
Sure.
And of course, no D&D Beyond or Google or anything else, Roll20 to kind of keep track of your monsters and kind of slide through screens with. It's fun for me to imagine that a dungeon master is like, okay, here, and then just kind of like puts the card down, looks at it, because they're essentially a 3x5, the size of like a tarot card. So it's like kind of like rolling in like with this tarot deck of monsters, which I think is pretty neat.
They're so gorgeous looking. Before I came down here to record, you know, my wife saw me looking through this stuff. I was marking off the ones that were original to the set, and she's just like, I've never seen these. These are beautiful. And like, she never gets excited about D&D like me, but she did for these cards. It makes me curious why they didn't succeed. There was supposed to be a second series in 1983 that would have done like Fiend Folio monsters, and it never got out there.
Could you imagine a monster deck of Russ Nicholson monsters?
Oh, it would be so fantastic.
It would be absolutely amazing.
The missed opportunities. There's an added layer of aesthetic that they remind me of. You know what cigarette cards are?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like those cigarette card baseball cards. These are bigger and they were hand painted, but there's something about the style and the tone of the color palette that really reminds me of that. So there's like a antique-y kind of vibe that I get off of, which I really like.
Oh, definitely. It's also very cool to see, in a lot of ways, some foreshadowing of like creatures and monsters, especially, say, by Bill Willingham, who, for those who might not know, went on to create and write one of my favorite comics of all time, Fables.
Yeah.
And so you definitely kind of see where the roots of certain ideas come from with monster cards like this and his old D&D artwork.
Sure. And reference cards in general are, I think, an underappreciated facet of Dungeons & Dragons. I love, in second edition, there's several decks. They made too many decks, but I don't know how useful people found the spell cards. But like, I think the magic item cards and the random encounter decks are just fantastic. And I love them, and I wish there was more stuff like that.
Well, spell decks and magic item decks I have found to be extremely useful, especially with new players.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm going to walk that back with older players too, because, for instance, I play a game where we're almost done with Tomb of Annihilation. And for those of you who have been listening to this podcast, you know it's taken a while. And that said, it's taken a while because everyone's older and everyone has a lot of other responsibilities. So that game time that we have to play the game is super precious. Having cards like spell cards, having cards like item cards for magic items, it comes in so handy because you can just either slot them into your player's handbook and kind of carry it with you, and then you bring it to the next adventure and you're like, oh yeah, this is the stuff that I have, and it doesn't just get lost in all the scribblings on your character sheet. So I can appreciate, I think, more than the monster cards, spell cards.
Sure.
And magic item cards.
I can't argue about the magic item cards. I think the magic item cards have just fueled a sort of creativeness in my games. Like, I love handing out a card that has a magic item scrawled on it. I think that the idea winds up being less useful than the execution, but that's just my games. And we're off the subject here. We're talking about monsters.
So Stu, from the monster cards, what's your favorite monster?
Oh, that's a hard one. I think it's the Errol Otis Nycadaemon, because it looks so weird and lumpy. It reminds me of, have y'all seen The Keep? Michael Mann's version of The Keep with Ian McKellen? The answer is no. Nobody's seen that movie except like 15 people.
I'm not one of those 15 people.
Yeah, so there's like this crazy golem/vampire creature called Balasar in it that's the villain. And it's like this big hulking thing that looks like it's out of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. And the Nycadaemon just has this kind of vibe. It's the same kind of color palette. He's big and lumpy and just looks not like a typical demon kind of thing. And I like it. And Errol Otis in general kind of just wows me because he's just left of what I expect, a little bit psychedelic, you know?
So this is Michael Miami Vice Mann who made this fantasy movie.
Yes.
Wow.
The elevator pitch is vampires versus Nazis.
Well, I'm sold American.
It's a terrible movie. It's not very good.
Oh.
It got hacked up by the studio, and he sort of disavowed it. I don't think they've ever re-released it.
Yeah, I've never heard of it up until this moment.
Yeah, 1980, I think.
Yeah, he's only done crime drama since.
Yeah. Mayfair Games did an adaptation of it for D&D, which I ran last year in the feed around this time.
I learn new things every day.
Yeah, it's super weird.
So, Stu, do you have any final thoughts on the monster cards?
Try to find them. Even if you just look up scans or something on the internet, like they're just so interesting. It's so cool because I feel like the images of a lot of these early iconic monsters are so rooted in our minds. It's eye-opening to see different interpretations of them.
So you can definitely find them on the eBay. Or if you're at the local toy show, sometimes if you ask, they might have what you're looking for. Speaking of what you're looking for, Stu, where can people find you?
Every day on Instagram at Vintage RPG, posting about vintage RPGs. I made the name really simple, so I wouldn't forget it.
Oh, God. You can find me on the Twitter at Handbreaker. I tweet about professional wrestling. I tweet about Dungeons & Dragons. I tweet about cute animals. You could also find my day-to-day adventures in podcasting and in life on Instagram at John Hambone McGuire. And you can check out my other podcast, My Thai Happy Hour. It's pop culture for weirdos wherever podcasts are found. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dego West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron.